The wedding invitation arrived exactly 6 months after my divorce papers were finalized, wrapped in cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering so elegant, it almost made me laugh. Robert Parker and Linda Hayes request the pleasure of your company. My husband of 43 years and my best friend since college were getting married at the same country club where Robert and I celebrated our 40th anniversary. I sat alone at my kitchen table in Scottsdale staring at the invitation while his coffee mug still rested beside mine in the cabinet above the sink, because apparently part of me still had not accepted that he was really gone. Outside, the Arizona sun painted long orange shadows across the patio tiles while sprinklers clicked softly somewhere in the neighborhood. Retirement communities always sound peaceful in brochures. Nobody mentions how loud loneliness becomes at sunset. I folded the invitation once, then twice. My hands shook slightly by the third fold, so I stopped and set it carefully beside the untouched cup of tea growing cold near my elbow. 6 months. That was all it took. 6 months after ending a marriage that lasted longer than some people stay alive. 6 months after sitting across from me in divorce mediation pretending he needed time to rediscover himself. Apparently, rediscovery looked a lot like marrying my closest friend in a golf club ballroom, with white roses and champagne fountains. I remember the exact moment Robert told me he wanted a divorce. Tuesday afternoon. Dry heat outside. Linda sitting in my living room drinking iced tea while pretending not to cry. At first I thought someone had died. Robert could barely look at me while speaking. "Helen," he said quietly, "I think we both deserve happiness." People always use soft language before destroying your life at our age. Like politeness somehow cushions betrayal. Then Linda reached for his hand. My best friend. The woman who held me after my mother's funeral. The woman who hosted my 65th birthday brunch. The woman who helped choose the dress Claire wore to her wedding. I stared at their hands touching on my couch, while something inside me simply went still. No screaming. No dramatic breakdown. Just silence. The kind that arrives when pain is too large for immediate reaction. "How long?" I asked eventually. Linda looked down at her lap. Robert answered instead. "A few months." I would later discover it had been almost 2 years. Affairs among older people always seem more humiliating somehow, because society expects wisdom after 60. Dignity. Loyalty. Not secret hotel weekends, disguised as golf tournaments and charity conferences. The strangest part was how normal everything looked afterward. The next morning the coffee maker still started automatically at 6:30. The neighbor still walked her golden retriever past our driveway at sunrise. The mailman still waved politely from the curb. Meanwhile, my entire marriage sat shattered quietly beneath ordinary routines. Claire tried comforting me in the beginning. "Mom, people change," she said gently while helping me sort legal paperwork during the divorce. At least they were honest eventually. Honest eventually. Funny phrase. Like years of lying somehow become noble if confession arrives late enough. I spent most evenings alone after the divorce, sitting on the patio, watching desert sunsets bleed red across the mountains, while Facebook slowly transformed into its own special form of torture. Linda posting wine tastings in Napa. Robert smiling beside her at charity galas wearing the navy blazer I bought him for our anniversary. Mutual friends commenting things like, "You two look so happy together," and "finally living your best lives." That part hurt more than I expected. Not just losing my husband. Losing the version of my life everybody seemed eager to replace without hesitation. Around 7 that evening, my daughter called while I was still staring at the wedding invitation beneath the kitchen light. "Did you get it?" she asked immediately. Of course she already knew. News travels fast inside wealthy retirement communities where people survive mostly on gossip and golf memberships. "Yes." Claire sighed softly into the phone. "Mom, I know this is awful." I looked toward the dark kitchen window reflecting my own face back at me. Older than I remembered. Tired in places makeup no longer fixed. "Do you?" Silence stretched briefly between us. Then she said the sentence everyone eventually says to older women after betrayal. "Maybe this is your chance to finally move forward too." Move forward. Such a neat little phrase for dismantling 43 years of shared routines, holidays, losses, and inside jokes nobody else understands. "I am trying," I answered quietly. "Good." She hesitated briefly afterward. "You know staying angry only hurts you." I almost laughed hearing that because people always assume silence means bitterness. The truth was stranger. I was not angry anymore. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed that I ignored obvious signs for years because trusting someone felt easier than questioning them. Embarrassed that Linda knew the intimate details of my marriage while quietly becoming part of its collapse. Embarrassed that at 67 years old, I suddenly felt like the lonely woman everyone politely avoids at dinner parties because divorce after retirement makes people uncomfortable. After the call ended, I carried the wedding invitation outside onto the patio. Warm desert wind moved softly through the palm trees, while distant music drifted from the country club several blocks away. Robert used to love evenings like this. We would sit together drinking wine while he talked about traveling more after retirement. Italy, Greece, coastal California. Instead, 6 months after leaving me, he was apparently taking Linda to Italy for their honeymoon, according to the tiny handwritten note tucked inside the invitation. Hope you can be happy for us. I read that sentence 3 times beneath the Arizona night sky before finally understanding something painful. They did not send the invitation out of kindness. They sent it because happy people like witnesses. I folded the card carefully once more before setting it beside the patio candle flickering between us. Then I sat alone beneath the desert stars listening to the quiet hum of sprinklers across the neighborhood, while 43 years of marriage settled slowly into memory. The morning after the wedding invitation arrived, I found myself standing in front of my closet staring at a navy blue dress Linda once told me made me look timeless. Funny how betrayal poisons ordinary things afterward. Suddenly, every compliment carried suspicion. Every shared memory felt contaminated. I pulled the dress from the hanger slowly and tossed it into a donation box already sitting half full near the bedroom door. Since the divorce, I had been quietly clearing pieces of my old life from the house one room at a time. Robert's golf sweaters, framed vacation photos, matching coffee mugs from Napa Valley. 43 years of marriage leaves behind more objects than people realize. The physical remains of devotion become exhausting eventually. By noon, the Arizona heat pressed heavily against the windows while I sat at the kitchen island sorting through old photo albums I should have packed away months ago. I do not know why I kept looking through them. Maybe because part of me still wanted proof that the life I remembered actually happened. There was Linda smiling beside me during Claire's baby shower 20 years earlier. Linda holding my hand after my hysterectomy surgery. Linda laughing beside Robert during backyard barbecues, while Richard Marx played softly through outdoor speakers and everyone drank cheap wine beneath patio lights. Looking back now, what unsettled me most was not discovering signs of betrayal. It was realizing how comfortably betrayal lived beside ordinary life for so long. Tiny moments suddenly rearranged themselves inside my head with painful clarity. Linda insisting Robert looked handsome in blue while helping him choose a tie before charity dinners. Linda calling him directly whenever she could not figure out her Wi-Fi instead of asking her own husband. Linda sitting beside Robert at golf club luncheons while I fetched drinks or spoke with event organizers. At the time, I thought nothing of it because trust after 40 years becomes automatic. That is the dangerous thing about loyalty. Once somebody earns it, you stop checking whether they still deserve it. Around 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. I should have ignored it. Instead, like an idiot, I opened the app anyway. There they were. Robert and Linda standing together outside some luxury resort in Florence beneath bright Italian sunlight. Robert wore the linen shirt I bought him during our anniversary trip to Santa Barbara. Linda rested one manicured hand against his chest, while both smiled directly at the camera like newlyweds in a travel magazine advertisement. Starting our forever together in Italy, the caption read. Beneath it sat dozens of comments from people I once considered friends. So happy you found each other. You two were always meant to be. True love always finds its way. I stared at the screen while something cold settled heavily inside my chest. Always meant to be. The phrase repeated itself over and over in my head while I scrolled through comment after comment from people who apparently watched my marriage collapse from the sidelines without ever warning me. Then suddenly another realization hit me even harder. Some of them probably knew long before I did. Country clubs thrive on gossip disguised as politeness. Women notice things. Husbands notice things. People talk quietly over wine and golf games while pretending not to, which meant there was a good chance I had spent the last 2 years smiling through dinners and charity galas while half the room already knew my husband was sleeping with my best friend. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. I closed the app immediately and walked outside onto the patio just to breathe. The desert heat wrapped around me instantly, thick and dry beneath the late afternoon sun. Palm trees moved softly in the wind, while sprinklers clicked rhythmically across nearby lawns. Somewhere in the distance, laughter drifted from the golf course restaurant. Wealthy retirees eating lunch, drinking cocktails, pretending life stays simple forever if you maintain the right memberships and appearances. Robert used to love that restaurant. Every Friday afternoon, he met the same group of men there for drinks after golf. Linda often joined us afterward. She always ordered white wine and flirted lightly with waiters in ways I once found charming. Standing there now beneath the Arizona sky, another memory surfaced so sharply it made me physically stop moving. Last summer during a charity auction dinner, Linda arrived wearing a silver dress almost identical to mine. Everyone laughed about it. "You two are becoming the same person," somebody joked at the table. Linda smiled and replied, "Maybe I already know what Robert likes." At the time, everyone laughed, including me. I closed my eyes against the memory while heat pressed heavily against my skin. The signs were never hidden. I just trusted the wrong people too completely to see them clearly. My phone rang suddenly beside me on the patio table. "Claire." I answered carefully. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice sounded hesitant immediately. "Mom, I need to ask you something." "All right." Silence stretched briefly before she continued. "Did you know people at the club have been talking about Dad and Linda for years?" There it was. Confirmation. I sat down slowly in the patio chair, while desert sunlight reflected sharply across the swimming pool. "How long is years?" My daughter sighed quietly. "At least since before the pandemic." I stared silently toward the mountains in the distance while grief moved through me again in a completely different shape this time. Not heartbreak anymore. Humiliation. "And nobody told me." Claire sounded miserable now. "Mom, people thought maybe you already knew and were choosing to ignore it." Choosing to ignore it. Such a polite way to describe trusting your husband and best friend after 40 years. I laughed softly then, but the sound barely resembled humor. I guess everyone respected my dignity enough to let me look foolish in peace. "Mom, it is all right." My voice surprised even me. Calm, flat, almost detached, because suddenly the betrayal itself no longer felt like the deepest wound. The deepest wound was realizing how many people watched it happen quietly while still smiling across dinner tables at me every weekend. After the call ended, I remained sitting outside until sunset painted the desert sky deep orange and pink. Then finally, slowly, I stood and carried the wedding invitation back inside the house. This time, instead of folding it carefully, I dropped it directly into the trash beside the kitchen counter without reading it again. 2 weeks after throwing away the wedding invitation, I finally removed Robert's clothes from the master bedroom closet. Not because I suddenly felt strong. Mostly because Arizona summers arrive brutally fast, and I needed space for lighter clothes before the heat became unbearable. The closet still smelled faintly like his cologne after all these months. Cedarwood and expensive aftershave. Familiar enough to hurt. I stood there quietly holding one of his golf jackets while sunlight spilled across the bedroom carpet in long afternoon stripes. 43 years together, and somehow the hardest part was not the divorce itself. It was touching ordinary things afterward and realizing they no longer belonged to your life. I packed shirts into cardboard boxes slowly while memories drifted through me whether I wanted them or not. Robert teaching Claire how to drive in the church parking lot behind our old neighborhood. Robert asleep beside me on flights to California because he always hated turbulence. Robert kissing my forehead in hospital waiting rooms after my breast cancer scare 15 years earlier while promising, "We are going to grow old together." People rarely understand that betrayal at our age feels different than betrayal at 30. Younger women still imagine rebuilding everything from scratch. New marriages, new careers, new futures. But at 67, betrayal feels more like watching someone quietly erase the final version of your life while you are still standing inside it. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed with another Facebook notification despite muting most of them weeks ago. This time it was not Robert or Linda directly. It was a tagged photo from someone else at the country club. A group picture during some charity fundraiser luncheon. Linda stood near the center wearing a white dress and oversized sunglasses while smiling beside women who used to sit at my dinner table every Christmas Eve. Robert stood behind her with one arm around her waist, looking relaxed in a way he had not looked around me for years. But what caught my attention was not them. It was the comments underneath. Perfect couple. You both deserve happiness. Finally free to live authentically. Authentically. Such a polished modern word for destroying a 43-year marriage with your wife's closest friend. I locked my phone immediately and carried another box toward the garage before the tears could start again. That evening, Claire stopped by unexpectedly after work. She arrived carrying takeout salads and a bottle of white wine neither of us touched. You have been avoiding people, she said gently while looking around the half-packed bedroom. I think people have been avoiding me too. Claire sighed quietly because she knew I was right. Divorce after retirement spreads through wealthy social circles like a contagious illness. Friends pick sides politely. Invitations disappear gradually. Couples become uncomfortable around single women their own age because betrayal reminds everyone how fragile long marriages actually are. Mom, Claire said softly while sitting on the edge of the bed. Maybe staying in Scottsdale is making this harder. I folded another sweater carefully before answering. This house is not the problem. But part of me wondered if maybe she was right. Everywhere I went carried ghosts now. Restaurants where Robert and I celebrated anniversaries. Golf events where Linda once sat beside me pretending friendship while secretly building a second life with my husband. Even grocery stores felt contaminated by memories. Have you spoken to Dad lately? Claire asked carefully. I shook my head once. Not since the mediation paperwork finished. He called me yesterday. My hand stopped moving against the cardboard box. Why? Claire hesitated before answering. He said Linda has been stressed lately. I almost laughed hearing that. Stressed. Interesting how quickly fantasy relationships become ordinary once everyday life arrives. Apparently, she is unhappy about some financial things. There it was. I looked toward the bedroom window where desert sunlight faded slowly against the mountains in the distance. During the divorce, Robert insisted most of our retirement investments were underperforming. He pushed aggressively to keep certain accounts separated from the settlement because tax restructuring made dividing them complicated. At the time, I was too emotionally exhausted to fight every detail. I just wanted the humiliation finished. What kind of financial things? I asked quietly. Claire lowered her voice slightly. Mom, Dad bought Linda a condo before the divorce finalized. My stomach tightened instantly. What? Apparently he used retirement money somehow. Suddenly dozens of strange conversations from the divorce resurfaced sharply inside my head. Robert insisting on handling certain investment accounts personally. His accountant becoming weirdly defensive during mediation. Linda casually mentioning how excited she was about starting fresh near the golf course before the divorce was even finalized. I sat down slowly at the edge of the bed while understanding spread through me like cold water. Claire, I whispered carefully, did Dad hide money during the divorce? She looked uncomfortable immediately. I do not know. But her face answered differently. Silence filled the room for several long seconds while evening settled across the house. Then Claire reached across the bed and touched my hand gently. Mom, maybe you should talk to a lawyer again. I stared down at our hands together while grief slowly transformed into something colder. Clearer. For 6 months, I cried over losing my husband and best friend. But sitting there in the half-empty bedroom surrounded by cardboard boxes and lies, another realization settled heavily inside me. Robert did not just leave me emotionally. He may have planned financially for years while I still believed we were growing old together. Outside, the Arizona sky darkened into deep purple beyond the windows while inside the bedroom. I quietly closed the lid on another box of his clothes and suddenly stopped feeling heartbroken. For the first time since the divorce, I felt awake. The next morning, I called Daniel Brooks before I could lose my nerve. His office sat inside a quiet 2-story building near downtown Scottsdale, beside a row of palm trees and expensive cafes filled with retirees discussing golf scores over cappuccinos. Daniel handled our original divorce paperwork 6 months earlier. At the time, I was too emotionally drained to question every financial detail Robert presented. I simply wanted the humiliation finished before more people at the country club started whispering behind my back. Now, sitting alone in my kitchen with Claire's words still echoing inside my head, something felt deeply wrong. Daniel answered on the second ring. Helen, His voice carried immediate concern. Is everything all right? I stared out the kitchen window while sunlight spilled across the patio tiles outside. I think my ex-husband may have hidden assets during our divorce. Silence. Then immediately, come in today. By noon, I sat across from Daniel inside his office while ceiling fans hummed softly overhead against the Arizona heat. He looked older than I remembered. Silver hair, now completely gray around the temples. Reading glasses resting low against his nose while he flipped carefully through old settlement paperwork spread across the desk. Tell me exactly what Claire said, he asked calmly. I repeated everything slowly. The condo. The hidden retirement money. Linda mentioning a fresh start before the divorce even finalized. Daniel listened quietly without interrupting once. Then finally he leaned back in his chair with a long sigh. Helen, I had concerns during mediation. My stomach tightened immediately. What kind of concerns? He removed his glasses slowly. Robert became unusually defensive about several investment accounts. At the time, without clear evidence, there was only so much pressure I could legally apply. I looked down at my hands resting tightly together in my lap. You think he lied? Daniel paused carefully before answering. I think wealthy men planning second lives rarely leave marriages financially unprepared. The sentence landed heavily between us. Outside the office window, traffic moved slowly through bright Scottsdale streets, while somewhere nearby construction crews hammered beneath the afternoon sun. Ordinary life continuing while mine quietly rearranged itself all over again. Daniel opened another file folder and slid several documents across the desk toward me. These were the accounts Robert insisted had lost substantial value during the pandemic. I stared at the numbers without fully understanding them. Retirement funds, real estate investments, trust transfers. Financial language always felt intentionally designed to confuse emotional people during divorces. What am I looking at? Daniel tapped one highlighted section with his pen. 3 months before filing for divorce, Robert transferred nearly $400,000 into a secondary trust connected to a property management company. My chest went completely cold. A property management company? Daniel nodded once. The same company that later purchased Linda's condominium. I stared silently at the paperwork while the room suddenly felt too warm despite the air conditioning humming steadily overhead. For $100,000. Hidden while I sat crying in mediation rooms believing my husband simply fell out of love with me. Can he do that legally? I asked quietly. Daniel's expression sharpened slightly. Not if marital assets were intentionally concealed during proceedings. For several seconds I could not speak at all. I just kept thinking about all the moments Robert looked directly at me across negotiation tables pretending sadness, while secretly protecting money for a future already planned with another woman. Suddenly the betrayal felt larger than infidelity. More calculated. More humiliating. There is more, Daniel said gently. My eyes lifted slowly toward him. Robert also used shared retirement distributions to pay deposits connected to travel accounts and property expenses before the divorce finalized. Italy, the honeymoon photographs, the resort reservations. He funded their future while still legally married to me. I laughed softly then, but the sound carried no humor whatsoever. 43 years, I whispered. And apparently I was financing his affair by the end. Daniel remained quiet because there was nothing kind enough to say after a realization like that. Finally, I looked up again. What happens now? He folded his hands carefully together across the desk. If you want to pursue this legally, we absolutely can. Would I win? Daniel hesitated only briefly. Based on what I am seeing here? Yes. I believe you have a very strong case. I looked toward the office window where sunlight reflected sharply against nearby buildings and luxury cars. 6 months ago, I would have walked away from everything just to avoid more public humiliation. But something inside me had changed since then. Betrayal eventually burns through grief and leaves clarity behind. Do it, I said quietly. Daniel nodded once like he expected that answer. All right. He began organizing paperwork immediately while explaining financial disclosure violations and legal procedures in calm professional language. I listened carefully, but part of me remained somewhere else entirely. Back in my old kitchen years earlier watching Linda laugh while pouring wine during dinner parties. Watching Robert kiss my forehead before business trips that were probably not business trips at all. Watching myself trust people who had already started building another future together behind my back. Helen, Daniel's voice pulled me back into the room. There is something important you need to understand. What? He looked directly at me over folded legal documents. This process may become public inside your social circles. Country clubs, charity boards, gossip, more whispers behind manicured smiles. 6 months ago, that possibility would have terrified me. Now I simply felt tired of protecting other people's comfort at the expense of my own dignity. Let them talk, I answered softly. Daniel studied my face for a long moment before smiling slightly. You seem different than when you came here during the divorce. I thought about the wedding invitation sitting crumpled somewhere beneath coffee grounds and junk mail in my kitchen trash can. I thought about Facebook honeymoon photographs, hidden trusts, $400,000 disappearing while I mourned a marriage I believed ended honestly. I said quietly. I stopped trying to save people who were already leaving. When I finally stepped back outside into the blazing Arizona afternoon, the heat wrapped around me instantly while palm trees swayed gently against cloudless blue sky. Somewhere across town, Robert and Linda were probably planning centerpieces for their wedding reception, believing the difficult part of their story was already over. Neither of them understood yet that I had finally stopped crying. The first legal letter arrived at Robert's house 3 weeks before the wedding. I know because Claire called me afterwards, sounding nervous in the careful way adult children sound when they realize both parents are telling different versions of the same story. Dad is furious, she said quietly over the phone while traffic hummed faintly behind her. He says you are trying to ruin his life. I stood barefoot in my kitchen holding a glass of iced tea while dessert sunlight spilled across the countertops in soft golden streaks. Strange how people accuse you of destruction the moment you stop protecting their lies. Am I? I asked calmly. Claire hesitated. He says the divorce was already finalized. The divorce was finalized using hidden financial information. Silence followed immediately, deep enough that I knew she already suspected the truth herself. Mom, she whispered finally, did Dad really hide money? I looked through the kitchen window, toward the swimming pool shimmering quietly beneath the Arizona heat. Your father transferred nearly $400,000 before our divorce and never disclosed it. Claire exhaled slowly like the number physically hurt to hear out loud. Oh my God. Exactly. After we ended the call, I sat alone at the patio table for nearly an hour listening to wind move softly through the palm trees while my untouched tea melted beside me. Oddly enough, I did not feel triumphant. I felt clear, like grief had finally burned away enough illusion for me to see my marriage honestly for the first time in years. The following Friday, I drove to the grocery store around sunset hoping the later hour would avoid familiar faces from the country club crowd. Scottsdale retirement communities operate like small private kingdoms. Everybody knows everybody's business while pretending elegance makes gossip sophisticated. Unfortunately, avoiding people becomes impossible once your husband leaves you for your best friend and then hides money during the divorce. I noticed the whispers almost immediately near the produce section. 2 women from the charity board lowering their voices when I passed. A couple from Robert's golf group pretending sudden fascination with avocados instead of making eye contact. Public humiliation at 67 carries a unique kind of exhaustion because you no longer have energy for performance. Halfway through shopping, I reached for a carton of strawberries and heard Linda's voice behind me. Helen. My entire body went still before I turned around slowly. She looked beautiful in the polished country club way wealthy women often do after retirement. Perfect blonde highlights, white linen blouse, diamond earrings Robert once claimed were too flashy whenever I considered buying jewelry for myself. Funny how men suddenly develop different tastes for different women. Linda smiled nervously while adjusting the leather purse hanging from her shoulder. I did not expect to see you. I almost laughed hearing that because Scottsdale was not exactly New York City. Apparently neither of us moved away after all. She looked uncomfortable immediately. Good. For several seconds neither of us spoke, while grocery store music drifted softly overhead and shopping carts rolled across tile floors around us. Then finally Linda sighed quietly. Robert told me about the lawyer. Straight to the point. Of course. I imagine he did. Helen, she lowered her voice slightly. This is becoming messy. Messy. Such a delicate word for betrayal, deception, hidden money, and public humiliation wrapped neatly inside one sentence. I stared directly at the woman who once held my hand during chemotherapy appointments 15 years earlier. You married my husband 6 months after our divorce. Her expression tightened immediately. Our relationship is not the issue here. I almost admired the confidence required to say something so absurd with a straight face. No, I answered softly. The issue is that apparently you both funded your relationship with money hidden from me during the divorce. Color drained slightly from her face then. There it was. Confirmation without confession. You do not understand the financial details. Then explain them. She looked away immediately toward the checkout lanes. Robert handled most of that. Of course he did. Women like Linda always position themselves carefully beside men holding wallets while pretending emotional innocence afterward. I watched her standing there beneath bright grocery store lights while memories collided painfully inside my head. Birthday dinners, vacation photos, shared secrets over wine. Decades of friendship reduced to this awkward conversation between oranges and bottled water. Did you ever feel guilty? I asked quietly before I could stop myself. Linda blinked rapidly like she was not expecting honesty. Helen, seriously. My voice stayed calm somehow. When you sat beside me at dinners knowing you were sleeping with my husband, did you ever feel guilty at all? She looked down at the floor for several long seconds. Then finally, she whispered the sentence that ended whatever remained of our friendship forever. People deserve happiness. I stared at her while something inside me went completely cold. Not angry, just finished. Because suddenly I understood the difference between remorse and justification. Linda did not regret hurting me. She simply believed her happiness mattered more than my dignity. I hope it was worth it, I said quietly before pushing my cart past her toward the checkout lanes. My hands trembled slightly while unloading groceries beneath fluorescent lights, but not from sadness anymore. Behind me, I could hear Linda's heels clicking quickly across the floor as she hurried out of the store without buying anything else. That night, after unpacking groceries alone in the silent kitchen, I found myself laughing softly for the first time in months. Not because anything felt funny, because clarity sometimes arrives so sharply it almost feels absurd. For 6 months, I believed Robert and Linda stole my life. Sitting alone beneath the Arizona night with strawberries in the refrigerator and legal documents spread across my dining table, I finally realized something else entirely. They stole each other, and now they had to live with what remained. The wedding happened on a Saturday evening in early October beneath white string lights and desert heat that still lingered long after sunset. I did not attend, of course, but in retirement communities like Scottsdale, news travels faster than weather. By Sunday morning, half the country club had already seen photographs online. Linda in an ivory dress, standing beneath flower arches beside Robert, smiling like a man who believed consequences belonged to younger people. Mutual friends flooded the comments section with champagne emojis and phrases about second chances, soulmates, and brave new beginnings. One woman actually wrote, "Love always wins in the end." I stared at that sentence for nearly a full minute before quietly locking my phone and setting it face down beside my coffee cup. Love did not win anything here. Convenience did. Ego did. Fantasy did. Around noon, Daniel called while I was watering plants on the patio. We received the financial disclosures from Robert's attorney, he said immediately. His tone sounded carefully neutral, which usually meant the opposite. I sat down slowly beneath the shade umbrella while warm Arizona wind moved softly through the palm trees. And silence. Then a short exhale. Helen, there are more undisclosed transfers than we originally thought. My grip tightened slightly around the phone. How much more? Another $200,000 tied to offshore retirement reallocations and property investments connected to Linda. I closed my eyes briefly while sunlight flickered through the patio railing across the tiles below. $600,000 hidden while Robert sat across from me during mediation, pretending fairness mattered to him. Apparently, Italy was expensive, I said quietly. Daniel almost laughed under his breath before catching himself. There is something else. Of course there was. Go ahead. Linda sold her previous condo 6 months before the divorce filing and quietly moved substantial funds into a joint investment structure with Robert. I stared silently toward the mountains in the distance while pieces finally locked together completely inside my head. The affair was never spontaneous, never emotional confusion. They planned this carefully for years. The financial accounts, the condo, the timing. Even the divorce itself suddenly looked less like heartbreak and more like project management. How bad does this look legally? I asked softly. Daniel answered immediately this time. Very bad for them. After the call ended, I remained sitting outside for a long while listening to the fountain trickle quietly beside the patio garden. Surprisingly, I did not feel devastated anymore. Betrayal eventually reaches a point where it becomes too large for grief and transforms into clarity instead. Robert and Linda did not accidentally fall in love. They constructed a new life together while carefully dismantling mine behind the scenes piece by piece. Oddly enough, that realization made me feel freer than anything else had since the divorce. Later that week, I attended the annual charity gala at the country club for the first time since the separation. Claire insisted staying isolated forever would only make people pity me more. "Show up," she said while helping zip my black evening dress before the event. "You spent 40 years building a life there too." The ballroom looked exactly the same as every year before. Crystal chandeliers, white linen tables, elderly couples sipping wine beneath soft jazz music while discussing golf memberships and grandchildren. Familiar faces turned toward me almost immediately after I entered. Some smiled too brightly. Others avoided eye contact completely. Pity always hangs awkwardly in wealthy social circles because nobody wants proof their own marriages could collapse the same way. Then I saw them. Robert and Linda standing near the center bar, surrounded by people pretending enthusiasm louder than genuine comfort. Linda wore a silver gown that probably cost more than my first car. Robert looked older somehow, tired around the eyes despite the expensive tuxedo and forced smile. For one strange moment, I almost felt sorry for both of them. Not because they lost anything, because they won exactly what they deserved. Robert noticed me first. His smile disappeared immediately. Linda turned seconds later and nearly dropped her champagne glass. The entire ballroom seemed to shift subtly after that. Conversations lowered. Heads turned discreetly. Scottsdale society pretending not to watch while absolutely watching everything. I walked calmly toward the silent auction tables and placed my donation envelope beside the event coordinator without acknowledging either of them. Then unexpectedly, George Whitman appeared beside me carrying 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you might need reinforcement," he murmured quietly. I smiled for the first time all evening. "You always did have terrible timing. 40 years of friendship says otherwise." We stood together near the ballroom windows while desert night settled softly outside beyond the golf course lights. Across the room, I could feel Robert watching me repeatedly while Linda spoke sharply beside him. Their body language looked strained in ways photographs never reveal online. "People are talking," George said quietly after a while. "About the lawsuit?" He nodded once. Apparently Robert did not mention the hidden accounts to Linda either. That surprised me enough to laugh softly. "You mean the woman who helped him deceive me is suddenly uncomfortable being deceived herself?" George smirked into his wine glass. "Life has a sense of humor sometimes." Halfway through dinner, Robert finally approached our table alone. Up close, he looked exhausted despite the polished appearance. "Helen," he said quietly. I set down my fork calmly. "Robert." Silence stretched awkwardly between us, while people nearby pretended intense fascination with bread baskets and wine labels. "You did not need to do this publicly," he muttered finally. "Publicly." Funny word coming from a man who married my best friend at the same country club where everyone watched our marriage collapse. "You hid $600,000, I answered softly. "That stopped being private a long time ago." His jaw tightened slightly. "Linda is overwhelmed." There it was. Not remorse for betraying me. Concern for the woman replacing me. Somehow that hurt less than I expected now. "I imagine she is," I said calmly before lifting my wine glass again. Robert stood there another few seconds like he expected more from me. Anger. Tears. Some dramatic emotional scene, proving he still mattered deeply enough to destroy me. Instead, I simply looked past him toward the desert night outside the ballroom windows while jazz music played softly overhead. Eventually, he walked away alone. And for the first time since the divorce, watching him leave did not feel like losing anything at all. 3 months after the wedding, the lawsuit became impossible for Robert and Linda to hide from anyone at the country club. Scottsdale thrives on appearances, but legal filings have a way of cutting through polished smiles and champagne conversations very quickly. Suddenly, people who once commented, "perfect couple," beneath their honeymoon photos began lowering their voices whenever Linda entered a room. Invitations slowed. Golf invitations became selective. Charity board members suddenly developed scheduling conflicts. whenever Robert suggested attending events together. Reputation among wealthy retirees functions like fragile glass. It only takes one visible crack before everyone notices the damage. Daniel called me one Tuesday morning while I was walking through the farmer's market downtown. "We received the revised disclosures," he said immediately. Robert settled 2 offshore accounts quietly before the hearing. I stopped beside a flower stand overflowing with sunflowers and desert lavender. "How much?" "Enough that your original settlement would have been dramatically different if the assets were disclosed honestly." Around me, people browsed produce and handmade candles beneath bright Arizona sunlight, while my former marriage continued collapsing quietly inside legal paperwork. Strange how ordinary the world remains during personal disasters. "What happens now?" I asked softly. Daniel sounded almost impressed. "Honestly, Robert is panicking." For a brief second, I pictured my ex-husband sitting inside his expensive condo, surrounded by legal folders and financial statements, while Linda paced nearby in frustration. The image should have satisfied me more than it did. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Betrayal loses some of its power once you finally stop needing the people who caused it. "Apparently Linda is unhappy about the mounting legal costs," Daniel added carefully. I almost smiled. Of course she was. Fantasy relationships always look glamorous before accounting statements arrive. Poor thing. Daniel laughed quietly under his breath before returning to business. "Helen, based on the new disclosures, I believe we can recover a substantial portion of the concealed assets." "How substantial?" Silence briefly. "Then, possibly close to $500,000. I stood completely still beneath the Arizona sun while people moved around me carrying coffee cups and grocery bags. $500,000. Hidden while Robert claimed certain investments were struggling during mediation. Hidden while I cried alone on patios believing my marriage simply ended because people change with age. "Do it," I said quietly. "All of it." After the call ended, I bought fresh flowers for the house for the first time since the divorce. White lilies and orange desert roses. Nothing dramatic. Just beautiful things I once stopped purchasing because Robert considered flowers unnecessary expenses. Funny what women quietly deny themselves during long marriages without even realizing it. That evening, Claire came by after work carrying takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant. She looked exhausted the moment she walked inside. "Dad and Linda are fighting constantly," she admitted while unpacking containers in the kitchen. I opened a bottle of sparkling water slowly before answering. "I am sorry to hear that, Mom." Claire sighed heavily. "You are allowed to feel more than polite about this." I looked around the kitchen while evening sunlight faded softly across the counters. The fresh flowers sat near the sink, filling the room with subtle fragrance. "Honestly," I said quietly, "I do not think about them as much anymore." That surprised both of us slightly. But it was true. Somewhere between the legal meetings, the humiliation, and the months of isolation, grief finally started loosening its grip on me. "Linda thinks Dad ruined their honeymoon phase," Claire continued carefully. "Apparently all he talks about now is money and legal stress." I almost laughed hearing that because Robert spent most of our marriage criticizing emotional people for making life complicated. Yet now his carefully constructed second life was collapsing under the exact practical problems he once dismissed so confidently. "Actions have consequences," I said softly. Claire studied me quietly across the kitchen island. "You seem different lately." I smiled faintly. "Different how?" "Calmer." She hesitated briefly. "Stronger maybe." "Stronger. Interesting word. Most people imagine strength looks loud or dramatic after betrayal. In reality, strength often arrives quietly. It looks like sleeping through the night again, buying yourself flowers, realizing somebody else's dishonesty no longer controls your peace. A week later, I attended another charity luncheon at the country club because avoiding public spaces forever felt too much like surrender. The ballroom buzzed softly with polite conversation and clinking wine glasses, while servers moved gracefully between tables carrying salads and sparkling water. I noticed the shift immediately this time. People approached me first now. Warmly, carefully, not with pity anymore, but curiosity, respect even. One woman leaned closer during dessert and whispered, "I had no idea what Robert did financially. You handled this with remarkable grace." Grace. Funny how society praises women for surviving humiliation quietly enough to remain socially acceptable afterward. Across the ballroom, Linda sat alone near the back wall, scrolling endlessly through her phone, while Robert argued softly with somebody near the bar. Neither looked happy. Neither looked glamorous. They looked exactly like what they were. Two aging people discovering that fantasy relationships rarely survive real consequences gracefully. At one point, Linda glanced toward me across the room. Her expression looked tired now, smaller somehow. For the first time since the affair began, I realized something unexpected. She no longer looked like the woman who stole my life. She looked like a woman trapped inside the version of happiness she once envied in mine. I held her gaze calmly for a few seconds before turning back toward my table and lifting my wine glass beside friends who actually stayed loyal through the worst parts. Outside the ballroom windows, the Arizona sunset painted the mountains deep gold beneath the evening sky. And sitting there beneath crystal chandeliers and soft jazz music, I suddenly understood something that changed everything afterward. Robert and Linda did not win. They simply inherited the consequences of each other. The rain started just after midnight. Rare for Scottsdale, but desert storms always arrived dramatically when they did come. Wind rattled the patio doors while lightning flashed faintly beyond the mountains, turning the bedroom walls pale silver every few seconds. I had just fallen asleep with a book resting open against my chest when the doorbell rang downstairs. Once, then again, long and urgent this time. I sat up immediately, heart pounding hard against the quiet darkness. For one disoriented moment, I thought maybe something happened to Claire. Then the bell rang a third time. I pulled on a robe and walked slowly downstairs while rain hammered against the windows. The digital clock beside the stove read 12:47 a.m. Strange hour for visitors unless something was terribly wrong. When I opened the front door, Robert stood there soaked completely through beneath the porch light. Water dripped steadily from his gray hair onto the welcome mat, while thunder rolled faintly in the distance behind him. He looked older than I had ever seen him. Not physically older exactly, just worn down in ways expensive clothes and country club memberships no longer disguised properly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Rain filled the silence between us instead. Finally, he looked up at me with exhausted eyes and whispered. I did not know where else to go. I should have closed the door immediately. Maybe a younger version of me would have. But 43 years of marriage leaves habits deeper than anger sometimes. So instead, I stepped aside quietly and let him inside while storm water dripped across the hardwood floor behind him. Robert stood awkwardly near the kitchen island while I handed him a towel from the laundry room. The house smelled faintly like lavender candles and rain. Familiar enough that for one dangerous second, everything almost felt normal again. What happened? I asked calmly. He rubbed both hands across his face before answering. Linda left tonight. I leaned silently against the counter waiting for more. Apparently she is tired of lawyers, financial hearings, and constant stress. He laughed bitterly under his breath. Turns out relationships built during secret vacations feel different once accountants get involved. I said nothing because honestly there was nothing left worth saying about Linda Hayes anymore. Robert walked slowly toward the kitchen window overlooking the dark patio outside. You know what the worst part is? He asked quietly. I actually believed I was choosing happiness. Lightning flashed again beyond the glass, while thunder rolled softly across the desert. I studied the man standing inside my kitchen and barely recognized him anymore. This was not the confident husband who once organized charity events and golf weekends while charming entire rooms effortlessly. This was a tired old man soaked by rain and regret. And now? I asked softly. Robert stared out into the storm for several long seconds before answering. Now I think I threw away the best part of my life for an illusion. There it was. The sentence every betrayed woman imagines hearing someday during lonely nights after divorce. Funny thing was, now that it finally arrived, it did not feel victorious. It mostly felt sad. Helen, he said carefully while turning toward me. I know I do not deserve forgiveness. No, I answered quietly. You do not. He nodded slowly like he expected that. But I need you to know I never stopped loving you. I almost laughed hearing that because people always redefine love after they destroy something with it. Robert, I said gently, you hid money from me while planning a second life with my best friend. His shoulders dropped slightly beneath the damp shirt. I know. You let me sit alone believing our marriage simply failed naturally. I know. You watched me lose friends, dignity, and trust in myself while pretending honesty mattered to you. He closed his eyes briefly after that. I know. The storm outside intensified while silence settled heavily across the kitchen. Somewhere deep down, I think Robert expected rage tonight. Maybe tears. Some emotional scene proving he still held power over my heart after all this time. Instead, all I felt was distance. Calm distance built slowly from months of humiliation, clarity, and surviving alone. Why are you really here? I asked softly. He looked at me then with an expression I had not seen in years. Vulnerability stripped completely bare beneath exhaustion. Because for the first time since I left, I realized nobody knows me the way you do. Tears burned suddenly behind my eyes hearing that. Not because I wanted him back. Because after everything, part of me still understood exactly what he meant. 43 years creates intimacy deeper than romance sometimes. Shared grief, shared routines, shared history nobody else fully understands. But understanding someone does not mean they deserve access to your peace forever. I walked slowly toward the front door and opened it while rain and cool desert air rushed softly inside. Robert stared at me silently from the middle of the kitchen. Helen. I looked directly at him beneath the porch light glow spilling across the floor. You spent years teaching me how replaceable I was, I said quietly. Now you have to live with learning that I am not. His face tightened slightly, like the words physically hurt. Maybe they did. But for once, the pain belonged to him instead of me. Robert stepped slowly toward the door while rain echoed through the darkness outside. Before leaving, he turned back one final time. I really did love you. I smiled sadly then because somehow I believed him. And maybe that was the most tragic part of all. So did I whispered. But I survived it. Then I closed the door gently behind him while thunder rolled across the Arizona desert, and the storm carried him back into the night. 6 months later, I was driving through Sedona with the windows down and desert wind lifting softly through my hair when I realized I had not thought about Robert or Linda once that entire morning. The realization startled me enough that I actually laughed out loud inside the car. For months after the divorce, betrayal consumed every quiet moment of my life. Every grocery store aisle, every sunset, every dinner alone at the kitchen table. Pain has a way of making itself the center of your identity if you let it stay too long. But somewhere between the legal hearings, the lonely nights, and finally learning how to exist without constantly carrying other people emotionally, something inside me changed permanently. I rented a small adobe-style house near the edge of Sedona after selling the Scottsdale property earlier that spring. Not because I needed to leave in shame. Because for the first time in decades, I wanted a life that belonged entirely to me. No golf clubs, no charity gossip, no country club wives pretending friendship over cocktails while quietly collecting information about each other's marriages. Just red mountains, quiet mornings, and enough peace to finally hear my own thoughts clearly again. My new house overlooked a stretch of desert where coyotes wandered at dusk and hummingbirds hovered near the patio flowers every morning. I bought paints 3 weeks after moving there. Actual paints. Watercolors and brushes and thick textured paper from a tiny art store downtown run by a woman named Maria who wore turquoise rings on every finger and insisted everybody deserved one beautiful hobby after 60. Especially women who spent their whole lives taking care of everyone else first. She told me while wrapping my supplies in brown paper. I started painting sunsets badly at first, then canyon walls, then desert flowers growing stubbornly through dry earth. Most of them looked amateur and uneven, but I loved them anyway because nobody criticized them. Nobody expected them to solve problems or maintain appearances. They simply existed because I wanted them to. Claire visited often now. Our relationship softened after everything collapsed because somewhere along the way she finally stopped treating me like a fragile victim and started seeing me as a person again. One evening while we sat on the patio drinking iced tea beneath a blazing orange sunset, she looked around the desert quietly and smiled. You seem happy here. I thought about the woman I had been 1 year earlier. Sitting alone in Scottsdale holding a wedding invitation from my ex-husband and former best friend, while believing humiliation would define the rest of my life. I think I finally feel peaceful, I answered softly. There is a difference. Happiness depends too much on circumstances. Peace arrives when you stop fighting reality and start rebuilding yourself inside it instead. The lawsuit officially settled 3 months earlier. Daniel negotiated a substantial financial recovery once Robert's hidden accounts became impossible to deny legally. I donated part of the settlement quietly to a women's support center in Phoenix that helped older women navigate late-life divorces. The rest I used to build a smaller, freer life that no longer revolved around pretending appearances mattered more than truth. Robert called twice after the settlement finalized. I did not answer either time. Not from cruelty, just because some chapters end cleaner when you stop reopening them emotionally. Claire told me Linda moved out of the condo eventually. Apparently, constant financial stress and public embarrassment transformed soulmate energy into daily resentment surprisingly fast. I felt no satisfaction hearing that anymore. Karma stops feeling exciting once healing begins. One cool evening in late October, I drove alone toward Cathedral Rock while sunset turned the desert deep gold and crimson around me. Tourists stood along scenic overlooks taking photographs while soft music drifted from nearby restaurants downtown. I parked beside a quiet trailhead and sat on the hood of my car, watching shadows stretch slowly across the mountains. The air smelled like sagebrush and cooling earth. My phone buzzed softly inside my purse beside me. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Then curiosity won. Robert's name glowed across the screen again. Voicemail this time. I stared at it for several moments before pressing play. His voice sounded older, smaller somehow. "Helen," he said quietly. "I drove past our old house today." Silence crackled softly through the speaker afterward. "I just wanted you to know. I finally understand what I destroyed." The message ended there. No dramatic apologies. No requests to meet. Just honesty arriving far too late to change anything meaningful. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my purse without replaying the message again. Then I looked out across the endless Arizona desert while the final light of sunset spilled across the mountains like fire. For 43 years, I believed love meant loyalty no matter how much of yourself disappeared in the process. I thought survival meant enduring disappointment quietly while protecting everyone else's comfort first. But sitting there alone beneath the enormous desert sky with paint on my fingertips and peace finally resting gently inside my chest, I understood something differently now. Survival is not staying where you were betrayed. Survival is learning how to build a life beautiful enough that betrayal no longer becomes the most important thing that ever happened to you. A cool breeze moved softly through the desert as darkness slowly settled over Sedona. Somewhere far behind me existed country clubs, gossip, affairs, hidden money, and all the polished lies people build around themselves to avoid loneliness. But out there beneath the Arizona stars, none of it mattered anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I was no longer somebody's wife, somebody's comfort, or somebody's backup plan. I was simply myself. And somehow, after everything, that finally felt like enough.